all these different websites kind of feed on each other and help get specific information out there. But, here's the deal. For those of you who may not remember Gabby Gifford, she was a former elected official that was at a campaign event, and she was shot by a guy who passed a background check, but obviously was a little less than balanced. And she was able to survive her wounds. She's not been the same, but she's had an amazing recovery given the nature of the shot. And, she was on the other side of the political spectrum. She was a Democrat, and she was a fairly progressive voting Democrat. So, obviously, no respect for her political ideology. But you never want to see something like that happen to another human being. So, obviously, very happy for her, in so much that her recovery was as miraculous as it was. And, she did eventually step down from her seat, which, of course, the Democrats would never have made her do. But she did it so she could go be a poster child for, which at that point in time when this happened, the Democrats' big pet project was to try and take everybody's guns away. So she had the opportunity to become a poster child for that, and she couldn't do everything she would need to do for that cause if she was holding down her Senate seat. So her and her husband have created a little group. They went around, they did this fraudulent BS about trying to get weapons without background checks and all that stuff. That made big news a couple years ago, or a little over a year, maybe not a full 2 back. At any rate, here's where they're doing now. In their ceaseless search for new reasons to push gun control, Gabby Gifford's little gun control group, better known as Americans for Responsible Solutions. That's not an oxymoron. I've never heard one. Anyway, they're pushing gun control now as a way to fight terrorism. Now, while this is only one of the 10 proposals that the Americans for Responsible Solutions is currently advocating, it's certainly one of the most egregious, in as much as it demonstrates Giffords and her husband, Mark Kelly, their willingness to stoop to anything to include pushing already failed measures just to get some kind of gun legislation passed. Now, we've seen this with background checks, which, as I mentioned, Giffords actively pushing as a way to stopping violence, although her attacker, Jared Loughner, I think was his name, he passed a background check. I mentioned that already, so obviously that doesn't always do the trick. And he was able to acquire the handgun that he used by passing that background check. But you see, now we see it in the push to fight terrorism with gun control, which is, of course, taking place in the wake of recent terror attacks in Europe, where Islamists, I'm not supposed to say that part, where Islamists were not hindered in the least by background checks that included not only a criminal check, but also in-depth psychological checks. Now, Breitbart News previously reported that a simple act of obtaining a gun in Copenhagen requires a squeaky clean background check and extensive knowledge of everything from gun safety to the mating habits of Denmark's wildlife, because, you're expected to be interested in getting your gun because you're hunting. Anyway, in Paris, Paris, France, where the original psychological check for gun ownership must be followed by yearly check-ins with a doctor in order to keep your gun, terrorists had no problem acquiring the weapons needed to carry out the violent attack against the Charlie Hebdo headquarters. In fact, the ease with which terrorists in Copenhagen and Paris acquired their firearms, well, that caused the Washington Post to report that the example of Europe proved the uselessness of expanded background checks. Yet, Giffords Group is still pushing gun control as a way to make it harder for suspected terrorists to get their guns. They also want new laws on gun trafficking. Although we already have laws against gun trafficking, and they continue their war on gun shows and internet classified ads for firearms. Also, as Breitbart News reported, when Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia, was pushing background checks for internet-based classified ads back in 2013, it's a small jump from background checks for internet classified ads to background checks for newspaper-based classified ads. Remember, gun control does not control criminals or terrorists. It only controls law-abiding citizens, who, ironically, are not a threat to begin with. So the bottom line here is, you're supposed to be stupid. Now, at this point in time, I have no doubt in my mind that Gabby Gifford genuinely believes that gun control needs to happen because she got shot. You know, getting shot can scare you into thinking and doing stupid things. Also, as a relatively liberal Democrat, I'm also sure she was all on board with gun control even before she got shot. Understandably, from that perspective, that point of view, that side of the political spectrum, that you might think that. But for crying out loud, the majority of terrorists weren't even using actual firearms very often up until recently. Before that, it was improvised explosives, which pretty sure you can't pass a background check to get improvised explosives, no matter how strict you set it up. Hence the word improvised. The very idea that you can pass a law and it's going to solve the problem of crime is insane. Dr. Savage, Dr. Michael Savage, who I don't often invoke on this show, but I will in this instance, said it very well. Liberalism is a mental disorder. And that's not always the case. A lot of people who think they're liberals really aren't. A lot of people who agree with classic liberalism think they're supposed to fall in a lockstep with the so-called progressives, and they end up backing stuff that ordinarily they wouldn't. So, I'm not going to sit here and berate all of them, but true liberalism, classic liberalism, is one thing. It's not far off from libertarianism. But the folks that are calling themselves liberals now, that type of liberalism, the progressivism, it really is a mental disorder. Because you're ignoring the very simple fact. You can't pass a law to make a criminal behave. You can increase the penalties. That might have an effect. It might work as a deterrent. If you're going to pass a law to do it, that's the path I would take. I would be all for stricter penalties for breaking certain laws. But the bottom line still comes that if somebody is going to commit a violent crime with a firearm, making it harder for them to legally acquire that firearm isn't going to do jack, because the majority of firearms that are used in violent crimes are either stolen or bought illegally in the first place. So background checks and any other laws you put in place don't affect the criminals. So how on earth do you expect it to affect terrorists? I mean, Gabby, Miss Gifford, I'm sorry about what happened to you. But this group that you've started and these people that you've got going, this is nuts. It is absolutely insane. And it's the type of insanity that Dr. Savage was referring to. Because it requires you, in order to even start to make your argument, how this would help stop terrorism, or how this would help stop violent crime of any kind, it requires you to suspend the reality that criminals are going to care about the laws that are passed. Because there are already laws in place prohibiting them from purchasing the weapons that they get in a variety of methods. The only people that these laws affect, the only people that they bother, are the folks that do it legally, want to be legal, but still want to exercise their Second Amendment rights to own and bear arms. That constitutional right exists. Stop trying to take it away. It saved countless American lives during World War II. The only reason the Japanese didn't make massive land invasions on the West Coast is because they were afraid that every American citizen would have a rifle. Or worse. They weren't concerned about our military. They weren't concerned about our Navy. Well, I mean, they were concerned. But that wasn't what stopped them from invading Oregon or Washington State or California. What stopped them is the fact that they knew Americans, individual citizens, owned guns, and we owned a truckload of them. And I also promise you that that's one of the biggest reasons why you don't see a whole lot of terrorist attacks carried out inside the states. It's not our military that's stopping them, although God bless them, love them, and I know they're doing their best. They're on guard and they're doing a damn good job. But it is not through their efforts that's stopping these terrorist attacks that don't make it through. 9 times out of 10, you got some just flat out fear that everyday citizens are going to stop them. You disarm America and that fear goes away. Then we become a much bigger target. And we're already a bullseye on a lot of people's. We're on their list. Sometimes, even when there's not even a reason. So, if you're somebody and you're trying to be reasonable and you're going to listen to this argument, just always keep in mind the one simple fact. There are already laws to stop criminals from committing crime. They don't work. And terrorists won't be any better. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wrap things up. Thought about touching on another point tonight, but I'm going to save some stuff for later. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed tonight's show, and I do hope that you will keep in mind the things we've talked about. Look them up, do your own research, because guess what? Don't take my word for it. Definitely don't take their word for it. Be prepared to take a little time, do your own research, because you're going to have to put in some effort if you really want to tap into the truth. Before I say goodnight, I'm also going to remind you this. If you think you're going to make a difference by standing up and saying something, remember, get your facts straight. Make sure that you're making a cogent point because you want to make sense. Because if you're not making sense, you're just making noise. Stop making noise. Start making a difference. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for good night. We'll be back soon. See you soon. I'm out. Good night.